Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in. We are waiting for all our participants to join in, and we will be beginning at 3. Co-host for today's webinar. I welcome you all to the webinar Problem Framing Solving the Right Problem. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today's webinar would be essentially the essence of problem framing in a business construct, and what are the effective stakeholder needs. And what we'll also be talking about is the application of successful cases for solving a problem using a human-centered approach. Now, before we begin the session, let me take you through a brief introduction of QAI and QGLUE. QAI is the process improvement and quality management company, whereas QGLUE is the design-led innovation arm of QAI. QAI has essentially been the global consulting, advisory, and workforce development organization addressing operational excellence with a lineage of nearly 30 plus years. We have a few numbers that we would like to highlight in terms of what QAI has been catering to in the past 30 years of its existence. We have catered to nearly 800 plus improvement projects, 400 plus Six Sigma projects, and various other figures as mentioned here. We have customer our journeys engagement of nearly 700 plus. We have catered to top Fortune 500 companies and have created 70 plus 750 plus person years of experience. QGLUE, on the other hand, is the design-led innovation arm of QAI, and we follow the human-centered approach of design thinking to cater to business problems. And we not only create a result and a solution that is right, but is also desirable. QGLUE has three main wings. Firstly, being talent and culture transformation, accelerating business innovation, and thirdly is the process service design. Of all the years of QGLUE's existence, we have catered to many customers. Here are the few that we would like to highlight. So for today's session, we have with us David P. Isaac, who will be facilitating it. He has been the innovation and consulting partner and practice head at QAI Global. He has an extensive experience of 26 years as a design thinker, lean and innovation practitioner, and has undertaken business process improvement to enhance customer and stakeholder experience across industries. We welcome you, David. Before we jump into the session, I would like to highlight to the participants here that in case during the session, if you have any question, you can use the chat window for the questions, and we will be answering your questions in different slots and towards the end of the session. Over to you, David. We're looking forward to this session.
Yeah, thank you, Varsha. Thanks a lot. And good afternoon and welcome to all of the participants. So glad that you could spend some time and dedicated your time towards attending this very specific webinar that we are looking at. And what we will look at today is how do we really, understand the problem framing. How do you really frame the right problem? Because that's a very important starting point of everything that we really do. And what we'll be really focusing on is, how to go about defining the right challenge. And the roadmap that I will take you through today and in our webinar, which is an hour's time, so roughly 50 minutes is the walkthrough through the entire journey, which includes case studies and others, is I will take you through the design, the problem framing roadmap, which is created by our partners, global partners, Design Sprint Academy from Berlin. And so QGLUE and Design Sprint Academy have a long relationship and collaboration wherein We run a lot of design sprints, trainings, and master certification sessions here in India and the surrounding regions as such. So Design Sprint Academy essentially is focused on design sprints, and they have based in Berlin, and they have worked with large conglomerates, large organizations, IMF, Microsoft, Bank of Ireland, and others, and being focusing on how to engage organizations to run innovation. So the whole objective of doing the design thinking journey and the design sprint and even problem framing is more focused towards how do you come up with better innovative ideas and how do you create this culture of innovation. And I think that's the broad theme within which QGLU and Design Sprint Academy really work through. So we have John Wetton and Dana Wetton, who are the founders, co-founders of Design Sprint Academy, and they are also our mentors in terms of taking the roadmap. So today's session per se is largely focused on how do you go about identifying the right problem. Is before we even jump into the solution, how do we go about really figuring it out? Is it the right tree that we are climbing? Is it the right focus area? And how do we go about it using a very structured approach? Okay. So I'll be taking you through this journey quickly in terms of what the various steps are, and post that we will look at some other approaches also, focusing on how do we use contradiction thinking to frame the problems, how do we frame the problems from the user-centered perspective or the stakeholder perspective, and can we really use some of these techniques for problem framing in today's VUCA world? Because we are faced with a lot of this COVID-19 situation, and you will see a lot of this focus on how the business as usual has changed dramatically and would continue to change dramatically. So the question is, in this kind of a VUCA world where things are changing by the day, how do you now try and identify which challenge area, which problem, how do you frame the problem in the right way so that we are sure that the effort that we spend is in the right direction? So that being the overall criteria, right? The flow would be that, so today's flow would be, I will take you through the Design Sprint Academy, roadmap and the recipe, which of course QGLU has been working, and we keep on refining it with when we work with our clients, and that's always been the endeavor of QGLU and DSA both. And in another 15 to 20 minutes, I will take you through the DSA roadmap, and post that we will have the Q&A. Like Varsha mentioned, if you have any questions as I move through the slides and explain certain elements, please do type into a chat window, and then Varsha will be moderating it, and we will address 2-3 questions as we go along in the next 15-20 minutes. And similarly, we will have one more Q&A round before we even close for our web session today. Right? Okay, great. So if we look at how do you really define problem framing, and what is meaning of problem framing? So if you look at from a DSA perspective, problem framing is a design thinking method, an approach from design thinking used to understand and define and prioritize complex business problems. So the key element is complex business problems, because if the challenges that we face are challenges that we have solutions already ready, then we need not get into a problem framing entity. It's just we know the problem and we jump into the solution. And there are many such situations which we are currently facing. Okay. So for example, I need to create an automated system for predicting the load on manufacturing in the supply chain. Now that's a very technology focused, it's a very supply chain focused kind of a solution design, which you already know certain factors which are influencing, and you have the data available, and you have certain models which you're already running with. Maybe it's a modification of it and tweaking it further. Now, in these kind of conditions, there is no need for you to get into a problem framing kind of a drive. But if there are contradictions, if there are scenarios which are changing, which we currently are facing, for example, I'm working with a pharma company, and others also will be able to align with this, is given the fact that we have lockdowns in very specific regions, and given the fact that there is a resistance from the retailer to keep our products and the wholesalers to even stock our products, how do you now optimally create a design to ensure that my manufacturing capacity, which is already running at 30-40%, is fully utilized for the criteria drugs or the medicines which are critical, like diabetes or heart patient kind of medicines? And therefore, if you observe, this kind of challenge has essentially this element of contradiction that is embodied. So there are constraints, there are restrictions, there are people involved, there is system, there is technology. And when this complex business problems evolve, is where we grapple with really understanding, defining our challenge areas or the problem framing. So essentially, problem framing is to be deployed in these situations which are of complex business nature, which are complex in nature. All right, and we want to enable our leadership to take decision making faster and better. Okay, so there's no 100% confidence that something will not go wrong, but the decision making should be an informed decision making. It should be agile, it should be fast, and it should be iterative. So that kind of an approach is something that we are really trying to figure out. And what we have here is a problem framing methodology, which can last for a cross-functional group, like leaders who are trying to resolve a particular business challenge. It could last for half a day and maybe a day, because then there could be some data sets and workouts within multifunctional groups to be done. But typically a problem framing exercise or a workout is a half a day or a 1 day kind of a workout which leadership get involved, typically 2 to 3 weeks prior to the design sprint. So if you are wanting to come up with a solution with very high pace, and the solution design and multiple options and prototypes for you to test, then you should know that when you are instructing teams to work on certain sprints and certain designs to come up with, what are those challenges that they should pick up. So usually 2 to 3 weeks before the sprint begins, you would have this problem framing workout done, and it would typically help. Outcomes would be to define the right challenge, to identify that space, to get the stakeholder buy-in also, because a lot of stakeholders would already be participating in this kind of a workout or problem framing. You could also have an outcome of where you would clearly define that who needs to be working on a particular problem area or a particular task that is given. So along with marketing team, should there be a finance team involved also, because we are going to talk about money flows across the supply chain? Does it mean that we need to have co-creation along with our clients? So do we need to involve stakeholders from there? And therefore you require 2 to 3 weeks time for you to prepare essentially for this to happen, right? And there could be exercises that you need to do before you jump into the solutioning design or to your sprint, on who your end users and stakeholders are. So that exercise also needs some time for you to prepare. So typically the problem framing workout that we are going to look at now is done 2 to 3 weeks prior to the design sprint. If we look at the subcomponents of this problem framing recipe, which has been refined by DSA and QGlue, and we all practice that with our consulting assignments with clients, and we do a lot of training and consulting. That space is having this 4-step kind of a process. The first being to contextualize the problem, meaning we are looking at a quick exercise to really understand what are the business forces, what are the key requirements from the internal stakeholders, could be heads of business lines and verticals, is looking at financial elements embodied inside, is also looking at the long-term direction, which is a strategic direction for the organization in terms of where to play and how to win. because that, given a particular scenario, always an organization needs to move in a particular direction that they have set up. Even under the COVID-19 or the VUCA situation that we are facing, is, there is a target, there's a target audience, and it could be really changing, and therefore some is the problem aligned to the broader concept? Are we looking at overall reducing of cost of operations in the current situation? Is our priority to address the manpower resources and move them into the right directions in specific area? Are we looking at not only putting the manpower in the right space, but also empowering them to bring about a lot of innovation in this kind of a VUCA world? Because it becomes necessary that individuals are innovating, and therefore how do you start measuring that innovation and bringing about that priority? So these are all multiple forces which are acting, so they need to be really understood before you even start defining the multiple challenges that you would want to pick up. The second step is more focused towards the business need, the priorities, the KPIs, the critical success factors for the organization, which are financially measured, people oriented measured, process focused kind of entities, which are tangible, measurable, and are directly linked to the organization's health. So how do you now try and justify a particular area that you want to pick up, not just because you like it or you have the capability to be doing something about it, but rather than it's got a lot of business sense, and there is a lot of business alignment and buy-in from the stakeholders. The third step, if you look at, is more to now change the perspective from the business focus to the customer or stakeholder focus, to understand hidden needs of various stakeholders through various techniques, to really uncover the hidden needs, insights, which they have, and then how do we really come about and create the solution. And finally, we look at how do you now objectively assess all of these frames and come up with multiple, not only one, but multiple problem statements that you would want to pick up, and then have them prioritize given the current resources which are available, and then an action plan towards, many teams getting involved, or sprints being developed, or core teams being formed with a certain objective to be reached in scenarios played out over a month and over a 2 to 3 month kind of a time period. So that in broad is the problem framing steps, as we really look at it. And in the DSA approach, the Design Sprint Academy approach, there are these group activities and workouts which are facilitated using a lot of structured benchmark kind of templates and activities, which help the team members to co-create, understand different perspectives, look at various pressures which are acting. So from an HR perspective, you may want to focus on employee engagement and retaining them. From the other angle, if you look at operational excellence, then you would also have pressures on ensuring that people are productively being utilized in the work from home environment, and therefore how do you now motivate and put other elements into it, and how do you align it with the client needs also, which could be changing very dramatically. So all of these multiple pressures are actually using very standard templates. They get really worked through and get defined. The outcome of the problem framing journey, if you look at these 4 steps, essentially is very valuable, because we see many organizations undergoing a certain drive towards improvement and later realizing that maybe this is not the right problem to solve, and it is not giving us the right business impact. Many organizations talk about business impact, and we have seen through our experience to many organizations, when we consult with them, is the prime reason why they don't see the business impact is they never defined the business impact when they defined the problem itself, and therefore the problem was taken basis somebody's judgment, criteria, or affinity towards certain solutions which were already known, and therefore the problem was articulated and defined in such a manner so that you could quickly implement the actions, and therefore it becomes very difficult for you to retrospect the business impact. So the key outcomes are very specifically, there's a lot of the strong stakeholder buy-in, because people need to support this journey of design thinking, of innovation and driving change. So there's a lot of the stakeholder support. You can identify the right team members who will jump inside the various teams and who could be allocated to various tasks and problem statements. And of course, the alignment of the problem statement and the precise definition of that, so that it is aligned to the business goals, objective, and needs of the stakeholder, rather than it being more of a judgmental element. So these are very clear-cut, outcomes that you would see. The next question is, when do we do the problem framing? And problem framing essentially, if you look at, is more to define, and guide and motivate our teams to work in a certain direction. And of course, the problem framing, if you look at it from that perspective, can be dovetailed before all improvement journeys, including the design sprint. So what you see here is a DSA design sprint, which is a 4-day sprint, a design sprint, which on day one is understand, which includes lightning talks and how might be's and mapping and empathy maps and others. On day two, it's the looking at sketching and storyboarding of your solution. Day three, to create prototypes and to create some test runs. And day four, to evaluate your solution with your stakeholders so that you get quick feedback. So it's a very high-paced kind of a engagement where you can iterate from the problem statement to a solution which could be tested in 4 days flat. Now, before you even begin this kind of a journey, we need to focus on the day zero, which you see here on day zero, is the problem framing, is at least 2 to 3 weeks before that, and especially when there are a lot of preparation to be done, you need to really define what are those problems which the sprint teams will actually pick up. Because if we start with a better definition at that moment, there's a high probability that the success rate of your prototypes and alignment to stakeholders is well aligned, and there is an outcome that you would see. So problem framing is done prior to running the sprint. A problem framing session can also be run prior to doing a Six Sigma journey, a lean journey, an agile transformation journey, because you would want to really figure out what are those challenges that you would really want to address. So problem framing approach that that I just showed you is very apt before you undertake these kind of journeys. And a problem framing structure also is well created, so that there are these elements which help us to define the problem statement. And we are not talking about smart kind of problem statements that we have always learned and we always train. So here is a fuzzy problem statement which has certain scope for you to define it. You have a scope to innovate, think differently, think out of the box, and really question assumptions and other entities. So for that, it needs to be slightly hazy, not very precise like we normally do in most of Six Sigma journeys, or when we create our CTQs and KPIs and scorecards for people to be attaining. So if you look at, this is one of the structures that is there from the Design Sprint Academy, is who are we, who is having the problem, who is facing the problem, that stakeholder, right? What's the problem all about, in terms of describing what the problem is all about, where does it occur, in what context are we really trying to solve it, so that we don't take challenges and problems which are very broad, because we can't solve very broad challenges. Usually a challenge like for example, recasting our human force or human force or employees into the new world or the new normal as we would emerge, is a very large problem. It has to be broken down into smaller elements of skill related, work related, of the actual work related, the role with automation and the remote working and remote collaboration. So there are these mini problems which are there. So therefore, this contextualization becomes very important for you to define the challenge. And then why is it worth to be solving this challenge in alignment to your business objectives? Right? So usually a good problem statement would have these components, and usually it's not focused on one metric or KPI, needs to find out some root causes for certain things which you see in visual form or you see as an outcome, and avoid any wishful thinking per se. So these are broad guidelines when you define a particular problem statement. And this is one example of a problem statement wherein, you know, we try and address, you know, for whom are we really trying to solve the problem. It's not us as a problem solving, but there are some stakeholders for whom. So for example, the help desk staff is our stakeholder. And what is the problem? So they have a problem that they can't find all customer information on the portals and on the CRMs and the databases which is available. And in which situation are we really talking about? So when they receive a complaint or an escalation from the client, they don't find all of this information available. And why is it very important? So that our solution will enable a single source of truth or a single point of communication or resolutions to people, such that it will help save certain money in terms of sort file licenses or the rework that we are spending, or the amount of money that is spent additionally in the cost of poor quality. So, you know, this kind of statements would really, you know, it's a very good example of how to really define a particular problem statement given the context of the organization. Now, if you look at it, it becomes very easy for you to measure it objectively, connect it to the larger picture of organizational objectives and KPIs, and then it becomes very easy for you to answer the question, what is the business value of doing something like an innovation drive or a design thinking drive or an agile transformation drive? How do you really connect it back to business value? So I'll just take a pause here and quickly, you know, let us look at some questions. So Varsha, any questions that participants have
Yes,
posed which you would like to
yes, David.
address?
We have a question wherein she is asking that if there are certain sponsors and champions who are undertaking and prioritizing a certain problem, yet they want to do everything. So how should they address this and come to a clear, defined problem?
Could you just paraphrase just for me once again, please? Once
Yeah.
again.
So
Hmm.
they are talking specifically about some sponsors and champions in the team who want to
Hmm.
prioritize the scope of their
Hmm.
problems, yet they want
Hmm.
to address to the larger problem at hand. So how should they go forward with it?
Hmm. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me, you know, so I'll give an example, maybe just to contextualize this for others also. Is we are saying that there are sponsors who are involved, multiple sponsors, and they are focused on their own areas. So, for example, I may have multiple sponsors coming in from operations, from R&D, from marketing, from sales, and others. So they are all business heads in those areas, and they have their own challenges and problems that they want to solve within a certain scope, right? And but
Yes.
when they want to solve the challenge in their scope, they are also looking at influencing a much wider challenge per se. And how do we now in that situation come to a very specific, you know, problem framing per se? What usually, and it's a very relevant question that is asked, is many times, and there are various pieces to this. Many times you would have people playing the role of a victim, that, you know, my team and our group is doing everything that it could, but there is a lot of dependencies from other teams, therefore the problem lies with other teams. The way out of this is to essentially form, during the problem framing itself, multifunctional group team members. So they come from different teams. So it removes this kind of a bias. And the roadmap that we really looked at in terms of the problem framing, I'm just taking you back to the three steps of the problem framing. It it makes people realize certain biases that they could be carrying with them. So one bias is that, you know, certain teams behaving in certain manners or individuals behaving in certain manners with certain assumptions. So these assumptions are really brought out in this entire journey of trying to articulate the business needs and others. And coming to a very specific question is when it becomes very broad at an org level, and how do you now try and prioritize, because there are so many things that you would really want to do, is you start putting the various grids. Is if there are so many things that we want to do at individual level and then at a very org level, then which of them are meaningful from a business perspective? Which of them will give us value, higher revenue, lower cost, margins, give us a competitive edge, or is aligned to the long-term strategy that we are having, rather than it being solving a current challenge only? So these are certain grids that are used to really filter out some of the high potential elements. And of course, in the entire method, since there is a multifunctional group which is participating in problem framing, there is this element of consensus and voting that continuously keeps on happening. So people are, sharing the pros and cons of why we should be focusing on a certain challenge area. So an HR person may say, why is a human retention and a human skilling element more important and of higher priority compared to ensuring that people are productive on the floor in the immediate sense, kind of. And therefore that brings a lot of this healthy discussion. So the movement towards the right problem is through various grids of putting business needs, stakeholder needs, and the organization's priorities given the current resources available. And since there is a multifunctional team working towards it, there is a high probability that you would come to a consensus of a common set of problems that you would want to work on, right? Themes, in a sense, that you would want to really work on. Right? Any other questions, Bacha?
Yes, David, we have another question which says that how does one deal with multiple scope iterations?
Right, right. Multiple scope iterations within the problem, within the requirement, within the overall requirements itself is,
Yes.
which again is a very good question here, because what you would sense is when you are actually working on the problem or the challenge, suddenly stakeholders will come back and say that, here is, you also take a process much before this into your scope, or you increase it to an org level. Is not only your department, take it at an org level, and now try and solve it at an org level. So what is important is that when you come to the problem statement here, and that's this like a grid that is created, is before you jump into the solutioning, and it could be using the design sprint or the agile methodology of deploying something in a project management that you're doing, is this buy-in from the stakeholder and the decision maker is done like it's like a decision gate, saying that here is a team, here is a multifunctional team, and your priority is to work on a particular problem that is defined in this kind of a template. It could be any template, but this template gets defined and gets signed off as such, right? Now, if there is a scope creep that comes in because of business need, then during the review it gets done is, do we now need to, because you would always assess in the design thinking method also, when you do the discover, define, or each sprint when you're doing, and when you again come back and assess your prototype, you would also evaluate that, is it scalable, is it for a particular area which is the original design that we really put forward. If we increase the scope, then would our solutions really change? Because the prime assumption that you are doing here is, given that the scope creep happens, my solution will no longer be valid. That assumption is usually false, and this is an assumption that we make. There is always an opportunity. I've seen many areas where the people start working with innovation in their own department in a certain kind of what is under their scope, rather than looking at a much wider org level kind of a change, but then realize as they move through that this solution, maybe it's a small tool or a macro or an interface that they have created for a tomorrow workaround that they created for a certain customer segment, can with a certain tweaking be made available org-wide across multiple stakeholder groups, right? So I think there is, so when there is a scope creep occurring, the usual bias is that I'm not going to come out with a good solution just because a scope creep has happened. Now that's an assumption. If your solution is very good and scalable, you would any which ways be able to attain the higher scope that the pressures are coming from business. And I think that's a challenge for the design thinker to be really working on in terms of solutioning, is, are my designs simple, scalable, depending on the dynamic need that keeps on happening onto my business. Right? Any other one more question, Varsha, before we go to the next?
Uh, there's another question wherein, just a minute. So, what is the ideal audience for who should be attending the problem framing sessions? Who is it suitable for?
Right. So, like I mentioned, the problem framing is more suited before any improvement journey that you undertake. It could be a design sprint, a design thinking. It could be a strategic initiatives that are getting launched. So if it is strategic initiatives that are getting launched, then the members of the problem framing exercise should be leaders, the senior leaders, the VPs, AVPs, the business heads, who are articulating the and translating the strategic objectives into certain challenges which individual groups will become and run. So they are very apt. If it is got to do with the sprint that you're doing in a particular team, then it could be a cross-functional team and some senior people who include this decision makers, sponsors, stakeholders who provide resources to be part of the problem framing, so that the guideline can be provided to the teams to be working in a certain direction. Right? Okay, great. So we'll take the other questions as we go along also. So does it mean that all design thinking and innovation journeys are all successful? Of course not. Here are some examples of failures. You will see something by DuPont, which is an alternative to leather alternative that they created, which failed. There is something here which is for the medicine for people with asthmatic kind of respiratory problems, which failed because they did not realize that the powder that they were trying to really inject was more of an irritation rather than trying to give a soothing kind of an effect to the patient. So you will see many failures are occurring around us in products, services, and other spaces is because we did not define the right problem. Right? We did not scope it right, or we did not really identify the problem right and define it in the right way. And therefore, the solutions were, of course, they were very good in terms of being feasible and being technologically also very maybe of a higher nature and much ahead of their time. But since there was no need existing and there was a higher cost and it did not solve the challenge either for the business or for the stakeholder, the failure is written on the wall. And like we do in the problem framing exercise, which is part of all exercises which do with design-led kind of an innovation, is you're translating the business problem into a human-centered problem. So you see here on how a business problem is getting converted into a human-centered problem. And that's how we need to frame the challenge. Is how do you say, for example, business problem is how do you increase the conversion rates on our website? Now, a human-centered problem is what is the easiest way to get users to figure out our products and services by their own. Right? So that need itself should be able to do the self-servicing. If you look at how can we lower the number of calls to our center or number of incidents and tickets to our support centers, and where people are resolving tickets and application support and others, is the much larger problem that we look at where it drives and cultivates innovation is how can we keep our products from frustrating users. Now, if that's a which is a larger problem to solve and a much innovative problem to solve than trying to really figure out those business related. But of course, as we define these human-centered problems, we need to also build in that blend of, why is it necessary for the business? How do you try and measure that? And what could be the probable end states which are coming in? And here is one example of a similar one is like a how might we statement. So not necessarily everything of your problem statement should be a how might we, but this is an example of how you can use and how might we. So is a how might we help the online wholesaler to reduce sales prospect leakages from current 20% to less than 5%, so as to, so which is the business outcome, strengthen customer loyalty and habit. Now that's fairly measurable in terms of its outcomes, despite unreliable key technology and infrastructure. Now this becomes very important is for there is this word despite, meaning for every problem that you are trying to really solve, there are some contradictions and forces which are acting against it. Okay. So despite unreliable key technologies and infrastructures, meaning there will always be this pressure of unreliable key technologies and infrastructure, they will exist, but even when they exist, how should we be able to change and redesign our process of engaging with sales prospects, given the fact that these limiting factors would act? And therefore, what is that solution space that we should be really looking at? Now, that gives an entirely different perspective, because now you're embracing the conflict or the contradiction, the limiting factor. In fact, many of the innovators and very strong innovators believe that the more constraints you put onto your solution space, the higher the quality of ideation. That means if you put constraints on time, cost, IT, and other elements, and the resource constraint, if I put, you will be forced to innovate any which way. So therefore, your definition should also contain these elements and recognition of the constraints. So the constraint becomes very, very important when you are trying to really define the challenge space. Is we are not stating that I could have done a beautiful solution in terms of an automation, but the company is not willing to spend money into this and pump in money because of the current COVID-19 situation. Now, I would say that's not a very good stance to really take, because if your solution is that very good, then it should be applicable in the current situation wherein resources are going to be low. People will not have the capex now to be really put in, and therefore you can't get solutions which will say that I could have created something, but alas, it is not because a team did not support me, because other team members are not supporting, or finance is not available, or people buying is not happening. Right? All of these constraints would be there and would exist. The beauty of the design thinker and the innovator is, how do you now define the challenge by embracing the constraint and trying to figure out the solutions, right? So that brings about to another journey and another approach to be framing problems under the VUCA world, because increasingly you will see that a lot of constraints will be loaded onto our solution space. So here is a journey on how do you frame problems and move from the current situation to and take things in your hand in terms of influencing them. So, like, briefly, I will take you through this. Is step number one is, if you're trying to frame problems for your business, say you're looking at a current business on maybe manufacturing side, and you're doing servicing, and there's an IT development teams, and there are multiple teams, and it could be organization wide also. Is I need to really get my teams moving towards certain challenges that they're going to resolve. It's not only BAU. BAU running business continuity is the order of the day, which has to go by default. There is no going back on it at all. But we need to innovate. People have to think differently. And what challenges do I give them? What problems do I give them, so that they are motivated to work in that direction? And there is recognition also at the end. So the step number one is to really understand the constraints imposed by the external scenarios, like the macroeconomic situation, internal and external entities which are forcing constraints which are getting loaded from the organization's front. The second is to really figure out, looking at the long-term objectives and KPIs and strategies for the organization, what are those must-wins, where to play, how to play kind of strategy directions which the organization has to define, basis which the critical success factors get developed and understood, which is point number two. And now if you see here, these two arrows join up here because there are these two opposing forces that jump in. One is the constraints loaded by the external world, the business world, your competitors, and the other resource elements. The other pressure is working towards attaining certain business goals, and therefore you are able to define constraints and contradictions here at this moment, saying that how do I now attain my objective, given the fact that certain things of constraints in macroeconomic and objectives are true, and therefore we use those constraints to define the problem statement. So essentially many practitioners of innovation define a problem as an identification of constraints, of hidden constraints. Because according to them, if there is no constraint acting on attaining your solution, then you can directly jump into taking your actions. There is no need for you to define any problem. You can just implement actions because there is nothing stopping you towards moving towards the future state. But the problem arises when you want to move to the future state, which is aspirational in nature, and there are constraints which are acting, and therefore the problem exists. So definitely when you define the problem, the constraint should definitely get addressed. Right? So that's looking at from a constraint point of view. Okay. And talking of constraints, which we have is there's another science which exists in what is called as inventive problem thinking kind of techniques, wherein you are using the general frame. It's like an algorithm that you're using to translate your specific problems that you are currently facing into a general problem and then try and figure out solutions. So normally when we move to from the problem to the solution space, it is more of iterative brainstorming, trial and error, sprints, lateral thinking and others, and we move to the solution. But the approach of inventive problem thinking articulates is how do you now define the problem as a contradiction, as a general contradiction, and then having defined it as a general contradiction, how do you now come to the solution? So that's also one of the options that are available. So there are many options. Option number one is the DSA approach to problem framing, which is like a structured approach. Step number two is you can even use contradiction thinking, like a map that I showed you between external forces and the internal requirements, and use them as contradictions, and using the inventive techniques to really frame the challenges. So there are these multiple ways of really framing challenges, and here are some examples of problems as contradictions. So this is for a simple SME, a small and medium enterprise, for loan processing they are doing. So if the loan processing is carried out in multiple steps, then work can be done by the generalist. That means if I divide the process of loan processing into smaller entities, then the generalist can do the work, in which case my cost of salaries will reduce, but the throughput will drop, because now there will be multiple teams engaged, and we know that once multiple teams are engaged, the handover will suffer and the throughput of the process will drop. But if I look at the other way around and try and figure this out, if you do loan processing as a single step, as a unified step, then the throughput will increase, the processes will become faster, but I will require a specialist to be doing the work, because a specialist has to be multitasked, right? So, and then the cost will also jump up. So now the problem is defined like a contradiction wherein you see these multiple forces jumping, right? So this is another technique of defining contradictions, not only in the business world also, but you will see in the physical world also. Like this is for a component that you're developing, and it could be a design for a water heater that people are really developing, and you'll see these contradictions, problems which exist as contradictions. So the beauty is seeing problems as set of contradictions that you would want to address. One of the other approaches, just briefly to touch upon it, is also we look at contradiction as the TOC, the theory of constraints. It's called as evaporating cloud, wherein if you have an objective at a certain that you would want to attain, how would you really want to move through? And therefore, is a way to check assumptions of for example, if you look at the screen here. So there are two opposing forces. I want to follow the established human resource procedures for hiring and promoting people, which will ensure fairness in hiring. But I also want to make exceptions to the established HR procedures for hiring and promotion. Why would I want to do the exceptions? Is because I want to ensure the best candidates get selected. Because sometimes maybe the criteria are so strict that I find somebody not meeting on the criteria, but they are very capable, but I cannot really select them, and therefore I'm not able to select, and therefore the contradiction begins. And trying to really understand them as chains of contradictions and assumptions. So there is another approach of using evaporating cloud to really figure out and frame your problems as contradictions. Okay, any quick questions before we go ahead? The next is I will take you through some case studies, quick case studies on how organizations redefine their challenges and could come to a lot of innovative kind of. When I say innovative, it could be very simple, but it resolved the problem in full. There was a win-win situation, win-win solution. So do not be under the impression that innovation is all very jazzy. Innovation is all very simple. It has to be just a small delta which resolves the challenge in full. Varsha, any questions by the team?
Yes, David, we have one question. What is the difference between user-centered design and design thinking method?
Yeah. So essentially, I would say user-centered design. When you say design thinking method, so let me address the first part, the design thinking approach. When we say the design thinking approach is defined as the approach that a typical designer would take to solve a problem. It is not analytical in nature, like we say, let me get the data, analyze it, and then have objectivity and finish. So a designer thinker's approach is more fuzzy. It looks at ambiguity. I need not have all information available with me, and yet I would focus on consensus and multifunctional knowledge available with people to drive this. So that's a designer's way of course, one of the elements of the designerly way of approach is the user centeredness. So when we say user centered approach, it's one of the elements of design thinking and the designer's approach, wherein the focus shifts from the organizational objective perspective. For example, I want to make revenues and sales to a perspective of stakeholder. That means what does the end customer want? Because if I'm able to figure out what the end customer wants and I'm able to provide it, then my revenue jump up any which ways, right? So user-centered approach is a subset of the wider design thinkers approach. Of course, design thinkers approach has multiple facets and elements, which includes one of the elements is the user-centered approach or the user-centeredness.
Should we take another question or do we address it towards the end?
Right. So I will we'll address the questions towards the end slightly. I'll just
Yeah.
quickly take you through a couple of case studies that should help you to articulate the importance of design thinking. Of course, the case studies talks about the end-to-end solutioning, but I will only deal with the journey that the teams took to really define the problem from the user-centered. Taking the cue from the question that was asked is from the user-centered approach. How do we really approach that, and does the problem change completely? Yeah. So this is an example for a large IT firm which is looking at improving cloud offerings to a certain space of medical space. So doctors, hospitals, large users across the country. So their objective is they have a cloud offering and they want to make this cloud offering and increase their sales twofold in the coming 1 year by addressing the diagnostic and the medicinal space of doctors, hospitals, and the related spaces. Now, when we look at this is a business problem. But when they started analyzing and framing the problem from the user-centered approach and understanding from different stakeholder perspective, not only from the business and stakeholder and all aligned, they realized that the critical stakeholder at the end of the day was the patient to whom these medicines would get addressed. And in our case, if you look at our country, which is a very large country like India, which is there, you will find the patients are spread all across in various regions, towns, small towns, villages. And unless we are able to reach patients in small villages, our solution will not work. Similarly, the doctors may not be able to reach the patients. And in today's situation, they are not even willing to meet the patients at all. And therefore, when they were looking, of course, it was pre-COVID that they were looking at it. So they say, if I need to, so the challenge area is not that I want to increase the sale. The challenge area is, of course, I have to address the sale, but that's the small piece of the puzzle. The problem area is how to reach the ground patients who are in the villages and small towns who have barely 50 to 60 rupees to spare to give to the doctor, and how do we enable that happening in real time using our technology. Now, as soon as this problem got defined, suddenly a new area got identified. Okay, there is so many things that we could do. Maybe we have to focus our attention not to the people who are decision makers in hospitals and others, but to the end customer who is the patient right at the very end. Similarly, another example here is for a electric vehicle, EV vehicle, wherein the team was looking at how do you create a business value to the drive to the organization or to the company in coming up with predictive modeling to predict, the current charge that is available and the optimal distance that the vehicle could travel, and the interfaces that will be there to ensure that the electric vehicle is obviously properly used and the energy is properly used, because it's now an electric vehicle, and before you it is not the recharge stations could be at vast distances, and therefore we need to ensure that the vehicle goes from point A to point B in a proper manner. And so they when they framed it from the stakeholders perspective, and when the problem definition started emerging, and when they started looking at this frame, they realized that the main stakeholder is the driver of the vehicle. It is not the fleet owner. It's not the person who is going to, it's not the designer who is going to design that off. It's the driver of the vehicle, and therefore the driver of the vehicle should have enough interface and simple interfaces and ability to control and take charge of the vehicle in certain conditions for the person to make decision making. So it's not an alternative to the person's decision making, it's an enabler to the driver to happening. Now, once that emerged, there was an entire different set of solutions that were emerging. Mind you, if we just get into full automation and figure out, sometimes the driver may be flabbergasted with the controls that is available to him or her right in front, where the person may not know what to do. And that's exactly what may happen, could have happened, and we have seen umpteen number of times happening. And the latest one is the one that happened with Boeing Max. Is you get so much of complexity around you, and then you don't realize what to be really doing, and you're at a loss. You can't really control it also at a certain moment, right? You won't be doing that in a sense. So what's the problem statement? So here are multiple examples that we have. This is something from, even from a online gaming kind of platform. The problem got redefined from the user perspective. How do they want to really umpteen number of examples that we can, right? Any questions here before we move ahead? Any questions? What shall I like to?
Yes, David. There's one question wherein if you are a design thinker and you have defined a problem of a differentiated product using qualitative criteria, and after some years, the acceptance of the solution is based on quantifiable criteria like volume or revenue projections, then how do
Yes.
you go about addressing that issue?
So which is also very relevant. I think what we are trying to really address, and this is an assumption that we are having, is that we don't take the quantitative elements in the assessment during the design phase at all. That's a wrong assumption, right? During the design journey, we also, during assessment of prototypes and the building of the prototypes and testing of them also, there is a lot of these elements which are of qualitative nature. Of course, the feedbacks are all of qualitative nature, and building and taking feedback and modifying, they are all of qualitative nature, because you don't get quantitative figures, especially when you develop a product. You can't just immediately state what will be the percentage of market share that it will gather, right? So that will never occur. It is something that will come de facto after you have launched something. But the essence is that you would always want to plug in the elements of quantitative measures as we move through. That means when the prototype is tested and brought to market, you would always be interested in the trial that you do in a closed environment. What is the impact in quantitative manner, or as well as qualitative, both, so that you get signals of what is really happening. So it's not that after some years you would start measuring it. In fact, the measurements of impact start immediately after deployment of the prototype, right? I think that's a very essential point that you brought up, very relevant one. It has to be there, because if it is not there, then people feel that we have created a very innovative design, but at the end of the day, it is not driving sales at all. I'm just giving an example, right? But if I test it in a pilot and see that it does get translated to a wide amount of sales, then of course it's totally aligned. But having said that, as time goes by, there would be a need to reassess the needs also, because the needs of stakeholders, they also evolve, need of market evolves, and therefore this continuous need for us to keep on running this engine of generating new products, services, and keeping our ears very close to the ground to understand the changing needs of stakeholders. Right. What I would like to share our new offering. So, of course, we'll continue to address after this quick one or two
Yeah.
slides. We'll continue with the webinar, and post that also. If you feel the need to ask further questions, or interested in some of the work that we are doing, do write up to us also. And Varsha will be reaching out to you, and please do write up to her. Varsha would like to take up some of our recent offerings
Yes,
from you.
David. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for this insightful session. And at QGlow, we have launched a new initiative as the QGlow Remote, under which we are offering all our sessions in a virtual mode. Problem framing workout is one such, and it will be launched on 27th May. So if you have a business challenge and you want to have a clear-cut problem definition and statement at the end of 5 hours, please feel free to reach out to us. You will be experiencing problem framing in a virtual mode, which is powered by Mural and Zoom, and you will also be facing the Design Sprint Academy approach of problem framing. We also have other product offerings in our virtual mode, which is the certificate program in design thinking. It has been running successfully. We have had past batches, and we also have a leadership workout um, for the current COVID situation. And in any case, if uh, any for launches, product launches, or any webinars, please feel free to reach out to us. Now we will have a small poll for you to answer in a minute. So I would request each one of you to take these questions that will be appearing on your screen before we jump to the Q&A session. Uh, can we have the next question, please? Yeah. Yes. So David, we had another question on what would be a 7-3-5 ideation technique, and if you could talk a little more about it.
Oh, great. So this 7-3-5 technique is a variation of the brainstorming technique, created by Edward de Bono in lateral thinking. When you look at lateral thinking, he does that. And 7-3-5 meaning in a group have 7 people. Each person will get 3 minutes, and each person has to generate 5 ideas, out of which one idea should be a crazy idea. So that's the technique. So for example, you are doing and you want to generate quick ideas. So the recipe is have at least 7 people. 5 to 7 people is good enough, not more than 7. 8 and 9 is definitely not a big no-no. Identify the and you want to take up a challenge area. So mention the what challenge area you want to work on. Individually, you're not doing group think. Individually, you will get 3 minutes for you to write down 5 ideas, one idea on a post-it note, out of which one idea should be a crazy idea. And post that, then you get into the round robin where you are discussing and sharing your ideas. So the technique is then you share the ideas. And as individual person shares the idea, there is one person who collates all of these ideas. And the team members, when the person is sharing the idea, say somebody says, I can create one app, or I can create an interface or a macro to streamline this process and make it better. and I can engage with my client in some other way, usually people would react with a yes and no. So I agree or disagree, right? So rather than doing that, you would get into a mode of using what is called a technique as yes and technique. And these are all techniques are available, in design thinking space. Yes, and so you say yes, this is a good idea. Yes, and how we can build upon this idea, and how we can make it practical. So even if you come up with a very crazy idea, you would use the yes and then say, okay, it's something crazy. It is hilarious, but what is the essence? Like for example, one of the teams, they came up with an idea to get robot to be interfacing with the doctor and the patient now, or taking medicines to the end customer. Now, of course, we don't have a drone and anything. Of course, we don't have that provisioning now at the moment of getting medicines via drone. But the essence is, what is meaning of drone? If the drone is something that goes unhindered, so what is that element that can go unhindered? And now therefore you use the yes and to come with better ideas. And that's the whole technique. It's called as 735 idea blitz. The technique of idea blitz. Ideas with high speed.
There's another question, which is it necessary to use the QFD tool always in the designing stage?
Not necessarily. So let me give a background here, because QFD is called as quality function deployment, and typically when it's part of the approach on Six Sigma and transformation, wherein if the process is newly designed or the system needs to be newly designed, or the current process is incapable to meet and therefore you need to transform it, you would go into an approach called as DFSS, Design for Six Sigma. So in that approach, if you're approaching it from that perspective, which is more of data focused and other elements, you would come into the QFD. The QFD is very, very relevant, very useful, especially very useful when your input data is coming in from very deep market. So for example, in automobile space or in FMCG spaces and others, you will find there is a lot of deep research done on segmentation and profiling of customers and needs in certain manner, and there are objective measures for each. Even in automobiles or manufacturing side, you will find that, example, a refrigerator. In fact, a refrigerator, then a refrigerator for the client needs to have hands-on cooling and utilization and safety and regulator and the standards on refrigerator, international standards and Indian standards to be managed. So those are requirements which come from the external world.
Thank you, David.
And the QM translates into a or a parameter, and it will further to even to a tolerance level. So that is useful. Right. Any other?
Do we have any insurance-based case
We can close
studies
now.
or
Any other?
yes, David, there's just one last question that do we have any insurance-based case studies or
Yes.
specific case studies on hiring processes where problem framing can be applied?
We have a lot of work for HR hiring and the BFSI segment. We have done quite a lot of work with clients and worked on projects, consulted them. So we can share that offline. Those case studies are available. We can share that.
All right. Thank you so much, David. Thank you all for joining in. In the interest of time, we would like to close in now. And if there are any questions that have been unanswered, please feel free to reach out to us. It was a delight having all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Thank you so much. Bye.